Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you all being here today. A quick access note, so if you're blind or low vision, as an audio description, I am a white woman with silver frame glasses and long curly hair, and we're in a lecture room. Sorry we don't have captions today. We will have them for most of our other talks. We're just still setting up that little tech thing. So today I'm going to be going through the themes and the ideas behind this year's TULCA Festival, which is Honey, Milk and Salt in a Seashell Before Sunrise. And I'll be going through the artists we have in the festival this year and just giving you a little more of an insight about this year's festival. I'm very chill, so you can interrupt me, you can ask questions. If you need to get up, stand up, go to the loo, have a break, please do that. No need to ask permission. I think we're going to go for an hour-ish. I might not make an hour. And then we have half an hour planned for talks and questions. So if you have any questions, either ask them through the talk or after. But yeah. So to start with, this is the lovely graphic done by our designer, Porrig. And the title, Honey, Milk and Salt in a Seashell Before Sunrise, which is a mouthful, comes from Jane Wilde, who is Oscar Wilde's mother, who recorded folk cures and folk culture in our time. And in my research for the festival, I came across this really poetic title, which I will expand upon why I selected that. But to start, I wanted to introduce kind of some of the ideas behind the festival and some of my thinking. So as Gavin mentioned, I'm from Galway, so I'm from Kilcolgan. So this was a bit of a homecoming for me. This felt like I was very familiar with the situation and the context of Galway, and particularly the phrase "to go to Ballinasloe." So as you might be aware, TULCA this year has a lot of disabled artists and deals with themes of disability and medicine and access in the west of Ireland. So as many of you would know from the west of Ireland, the phrase "to go to Ballinasloe" is a phrase to either go to St. Bridget's, the mental health institution there, the former mental health institution, but was also a shorthand for a mental health crisis or being institutionalized generally. And growing up in Galway, this phrase sat with me as a disabled person because it is a connection to a landscape. So the idea of having a mental health crisis or being institutionalized was summed up in a place. You know, even if you weren't aware of St. Bridget's, you knew that Ballinasloe was associated with that. So the idea of disability or the care of disability was situated in a place. I also grew up very near Kilcornan, which has its own troubling history with disability and violence. When I was invited to curate TULCA, there was a lot of questions around landscape, home, care and disability. And doing research, I wrote my thesis on a similar topic for my MA that I finished this year. And when I was thinking about landscape and I was thinking about disabled people's relationship to landscape, particularly thinking about it through a carceral lens, so through institutions that incarcerate people, I wanted to reframe that relationship to landscape and think of a more broader, more poetic relationship with landscape. So when Honey, Milk and Salt in a Seashell came to me, that was a nice way of reframing and expanding perhaps our relationship with landscape. So TULCA this year, or my perspective on the festival this year, takes an abolitionist perspective. So we have institutions such as Ballinasloe, but Ireland had the highest rate of incarceration in the world in the 1950s. So we imprisoned more of our population than any other state in the world. And the largest percentage of that population were in mental health facilities, such as St. Bridget's and Ballinasloe, but also Grange Gorman. And each town in Ireland, as I've learned, has a relationship or has a different phrase. Some people might say to go to Portrane, or go to St. Mary's, or go to this institution. So Ireland had more psychiatric beds than the Soviet Union at the time in the 1950s. And this was for many reasons. This was as a form of welfare. Many people were living in dire poverty, and it was a form of relief because there was food and there was bedding and there was support. Many people committed their family members out to solve inheritance disputes, to get rid of family members, even for immigration reasons. And a lot of people considered it kind of an unwieldy social welfare system. That was the only form of welfare at the time. But of course, many people end up living in these institutions for their whole lives, and kind of stains our relationship with ideas of mental health, of disability, and disabled rights. So this is kind of the beginning. This is where I was starting to think about the framing of TULCA, of thinking about the west of Ireland as a landscape of medical institutionalisation and incarceration, and thinking about inviting artists to open that conversation up, to think about how we can think about disability and landscape through an abolitionist perspective. So abolition is thinking about, it is anti-prisons, it is anti-police, it is thinking about a society that has a different form of justice outside of carceral punishment. So for me, TULCA began with the phrase to go to Ballinasloe, to go to a place, and the stigmas and the fear associated with that. And then throughout my research and thinking about the festival and thinking about this idea, I came across the work of J.J. Began. So J.J. Began was an artist from Ballinasloe. He would have been born sometime in the early 20th century, 1900s. And we know very little about him, but he ended up living in Netherton Mental Health Hospital in Surrey, England, between the 1920s and 40s. We know very little about how he got there, why he was there, but the only thing we have left behind are these drawings. So JJ drew these burnt matchsticks, so he charred the end of matchsticks, and lavatory paper works. And on these works he drew lions, human figures, flowers, fish. But in a number of works, you can see here that he drew J.J. Began, sculptor, Dunlow Street, Ballinasloe. So he named himself as an artist or as a sculptor, where he's from, and his hometown. So his work is now in the collection of the Adamson Collection. So Netherton had one of the first art therapy programs in the world in a mental health institution. And JJ's work is now in that trust. But because it was in England, people weren't familiar with Ballinasloe, and they thought it was a made-up word or it was a misspelling, and they didn't know it had this connection with mental health care. So the festival is dedicated to JJ, and his work has never been shown in Ireland, but his work evokes this recalling of home, thinking about identity, thinking about home for disabled people. So to celebrate JJ, his works are so delicate, they'd be unable to be transported. They're like the most delicate things, and my nerves just would not cope with having to bring them to Galway. Maybe another time. But we're going to have an event in Ballinasloe Library on the 17th of November. So we're going to show a film called Abandoned Goods, which features the work of the Adamson Collection in that hospital. There was many artists living there. And we'll also have a talk by Professor Claire Wills, who is an expert on JJ, and will explore the history of Ballinasloe and share more about JJ's work. And you'll also see these lions and flowers and human figures throughout our booklets and our publication and our marketing material, which are really beautiful and tender, and and I've also written an essay on JJ's drawings in our publication, which will be launched on Friday in Pálás if you want to make it. So yeah, that's like the introduction to the thematics, the framing, and some of the people that inspired the festival. Before I start introducing the artists, I have a quick note on access. So obviously we're working a lot with the legacy of disability in the west of Ireland, dealing with a lot of work dealing with disability and access, And a lot of the artists in this year's festival have disabilities. So access is really important about how this work is presented. And it is a core methodology in the festival. So this year, we've done a lot of work partnering with Arts and Disability Ireland to make sure the festival is as accessible as possible. Obviously, we're all familiar with Galway and how many steps and old buildings there are, and there are barriers there. But we've done our best to caption all our films. So for deaf audiences, you'll be able to experience the films. Many of our films are audio described. So if you're low vision or blind, there'll be kind of an audio description of every film, most films. Our education team have also been trained in audio description tours. So you'll be able to come to the gallery and those artworks will be described for you. We also have an access statement per event in our booklets so that you're able to plan your visit accessibly. So you'll know if there's a step in some building, if there's accessible bathrooms, if there's accessible parking. Because we're making a festival for and by disabled people, and it's really important that those experiences and their access is centred. So to start with the artists, this is a work by Sarah Brown, Echoes Bones. And Sarah and I work quite closely, and I've been a big fan of her work for a long time. And this film deals with similar concerns of disability in landscape and incarceration that the festival deals with. So Echoes Bones is the title of an unpublished work by Samuel Beckett. And Sarah worked with a group of young autistic people in North County Dublin, in and around Portrane, which has a mental health institution there, a former one, and has a similar relationship with the local people than Ballinasloe would in Galway. And the film is a really beautiful film, and it's a tender film, because instead of addressing this kind of large facility, this architecture in a place, it actually just like makes a film with a group of people from that place through a neurodiverse lens. So the film involves songs, there's poetry, there's jokes, and it's really this kind of gentle portrait of a place and a people. So instead of centering that violence of that place and the legacy of that place, it centers the experience of people living in that place right now. And it is a really joyful and delicate film. You can see that the colour has been very well thought through. So there's like, each character has a different colour. And you can see that it was made through a neurodiverse lens, because even the way the camera works, it reflects that experience. That film will be in show in Galway Art Centre on the ground floor alongside new drawings and prints that haven't been shown before. And that film is captioned and audio described. And Sarah will also be doing a talk on November 13th, Monday in the main gallery. So this, I'm just really honoured to have this work in the festival. So continuing on similar themes, Aisling Ornier is a Dublin-based artist, and she will be showing a work titled, let me get the title up actually, because this is the title of the work. And I want to make sure I get it right, because there's so many titles that I need to remember. It is Bless Every Foot That Walks Its Portals Through. So this is a series of paintings, 3 paintings, and an audio piece. So Aisling works a lot in music, has the Irish language, and has a beautiful folk and Irish music radio show on Dublin Digital Radio called Lowlands. And Aisling has made 3 paintings that you can see with the help of her father, Nollaig, who did these frames. And she examines the architecture of St. Bridget's in Ballinasloe. So thinking about how the building itself is constructed. So it was constructed in a way that was quite universal across institutions at the time, which was similar to the architecture of prisons. And she has made these beautiful paintings examining that architecture and thinking about the legacy of the place and what that says about the imperial history of Ireland and the colonial history of Ireland, and how architecture imprints that colonial legacy on the place, but also the politics of the Free State, so the Area Free State in the 1920s, and how incarceration actually increased under the Free State after independence. And she made another sound piece that accompanies these paintings that deals gently with that legacy, but also looking at the healing powers associated with St. Bridget herself, and what those two things say to each other. So this will be upstairs in the Galway Arts Centre, and there's 3 of his paintings, which I'm very happy to have. Another work that deals with landscape. If I'm going too fast, just ask me to stop, because this has been in my head now for a year and it's like all coming out for the first time now. So another film that deals with landscape and home is Holly Marie Parnell's Cabbage. So Holly made this film with her brother David, who uses eye tracking technology to speak to us in the film, but also direct the film. So Holly, her mother June, who is here on this lovely scene here, and her brother David moved from Ireland to Canada following austerity cuts to disability services, which David required to live independently. So it's a story of displacement, really, of having to leave Ireland for care, and then move to Canada. And then we rejoined the family in 2022 when the film was made, as they hope to return to Ireland. So it follows June mostly making all the planning that's necessary to come back to Ireland, all the paperwork, and then kind of the joy, the excitement, the barriers of returning home finally. But the film also goes through the records that David gathered in the process of being diagnosed as a child, how doctors and medical staff dismissed David's chances at life, and how June really fought for David, and through this you see David's life, how he makes poetry, how he speaks throughout the film, his love of farming videos on YouTube, of Aaron jumpers, and it's a really tender portrait of a family in a place, and you can really see the intimacy they have for each other. And there's a concept called access intimacy, which is kind of the unsaid knowing and familiarity some disabled people have with people who know their access needs. And you can really see that June knows David's access needs so well, and is and they made it home to Ireland, which is just it's a joy. And this is a scene from the film where June is picking seaweed from the sea in Canada. And there's one particular scene in the film that I really love, and maybe it's a bit corny coming from Galway, but June has a claddagh ring as a necklace around her neck. And as someone who's lived abroad for many years and thought it was a bit cliched, I ended up getting a claddagh ring, which my parents were very, very disappointed in me. Call me a Yank. So there is that feeling of kind of missing home, of being away from home, and the barriers of getting back. So that will be in show in the main gallery, which is in the Heinz building, the former Dole office on St. Augustine Street. And that is captioned and audio described. And in the same space, we have a film from Roosevelt Chappé, who's a Canadian artist, and this is Forgetting the Sun. So it's about a 12, 13-minute film. And in a similar way, this is his grandmother. So it kind of centers on his grandmother taking a memory test for dementia, and that is spliced with Iranian and Moroccan resistance films. And these films retell stories of the nation and how we remember. So in one particular film, I want to get this right now, the Iranian poet and filmmaker Farazad, The House is Black. So that film, which is featured and spliced throughout Ruzwa's film, visits a leper colony in Iran in 1962, and it shows the relationship between the director and the people there, and of course a leper colony signifies and acts as the ultimate form of stigma and exclusion, and is a part of and is of course somewhere that the state would want to ignore or not feature as a part of its identity or how it functions as a state. So Ruzwa really intelligently splices these images of films that resist kind of state narratives about itself and how the state wants to show itself and how you might want to see yourself as home, and splicing that with footage of his mother taking a memory test. Yeah. So thinking about like the intimacy of that, but also thinking about like state regimes of remembering. So what we're allowed to remember, what the state forces forgetting on. So that's why it's called Forgetting is the Sun. And there's a beautiful soundtrack to it. And Ruzwa's really made a quite special film. And that will be in the main gallery. And that's captioned. Yeah, it's a wonderful one. So there's actually quite a theme that kind of developed through developing this festival and selecting all the artists is, without really realizing it, is that so many of these works deal with family and loved ones and friends and lovers. And I suppose I've seen anyway, and I'm not sure as the males, but there's been a lot of work on disability in the last few years. And sometimes that's by disabled curators, sometimes that's not. And those exhibitions I find replicate kind of the austere nature of medical environments, and they feel quite cold and they feel quite, they don't feel very like warm and human and they kind of, and I feel like that's a disservice. And so many of these films and these works in the festival are just like about everyday life and about the people we love and the people we spend time with. So this is Jenny Brady's film, Music for a Solo Performer, 2002. And Jenny uses a lot of archive footage. And in this one uses a lot of archive footage of medical history. It starts a lot with the prosthetics that World War I veterans would use that were modeled. They were like very early prosthetics to disguise war wounds. And then you have footage like this. But it's also really beautifully is actually about her mother. So it splices these intimate memories and connections with her mother, and also the medical history, and is the most wonderful soundtrack I've ever heard. When Jenny sent it to me, I was in tears. And really captures those small little details that we think of when we think of our family, and that song or that TV clip or that person your parents really love and you don't understand why, and it's a bit corny, and it's just a really powerful film, and that'll be shown in the University Gallery, which I have to keep on saying is not NUIG Gallery because I'll get in trouble. So that's in the quadrangle kind of downstairs. And that will be captioned and audio described. I've worked with Jenny for a few years now. I did a show in Visual Carlo last year, and she showed a film about this deaf school in the US. And they went on strike because none of the management of the school were deaf. And they used sign language as this form of resistance and used call-ins. And it was just a really kind of like succinct and powerful document of kind of disabled resistance and disabled activism. There we go. Oh, this is, okay. So this is one of my favorite films of all time. And I wanted to use TULCA as an excuse to finally get it because it's from Tate. And you need big serious email, and you need all the trappings to be able to get this film, and we did. So this is P. Staff's film Weed Killer. P. Staff is a English artist based in LA, and this is a 2017 film, Weed Killer. So Weed Killer rewrites. So P rewrote Catherine Lord's memoir, The Summer of Her Baldness, which is an account of the author's experience of chemotherapy and cancer, who describes chemotherapy as a weed killer, or feels like there's a weed killer is going through your brain. And that is spliced with footage of the artist Jamie Crew in a bar doing a drag performance to a version of To Be in Love. And then also this person here, the actress, she performs this monologue of this rewritten memoir. And all the cast in the film are trans, and it really kind of explores ideas of contamination, of transformation, and how differing bodies, all bodies are kind of constructed through medicine. So not one of us, I'm sure not one of us in the room have been free of any form of medical intervention, be that, chemotherapy or hormones or antibiotics or a painkiller or glasses. And it really reflects on how all types of bodies are transformed. The drag scenes in the gay bar are just fantastic. It's in a lot of our promo videos because the song is so good. And in the original version, there was a scene with Macy Rodman in it. So Macy Rodman is like a famous drag performer, trans woman, podcast host, and also a kind of a punk performer. I love her music. She's fantastic. But when I was sent the version from Tate, I think they'd cut it. I think there must have been a request to cut it, which is disappointing, but I totally get it. So this is, I was very happy to get this work. It will be upstairs in the Galway Arts Centre, and will be captioned as well. Okay. This is as you can notice, a lot of the work deals with queer themes or queer community. And this work by Sean Burns, Dorothy Towers, is a really special film. This was commissioned by Edinburgh Arts Festival, which is curated by Kim McLeese, who's a Northern Irish-based from Curator, and who we have a good relationship with this year, and we're commissioning a few other things. So Sean Burns is from Birmingham, and Sean made this film and loves Birmingham and is very proud of it. And if you ever spent time in the UK, Birmingham's all sometimes the butt of a joke sometimes. But Dorothy Towers is a story about the Clydesdale and Cleveland Towers, which are two residential blocks in Birmingham, the UK, and they are at the end of the gay village. So they were renamed Dorothy Towers after the phrase "friends of Dorothy," which is a way of saying a gay person, a queer person, after Judy Garland. So that is what the film is about. But the film follows the people living there and the history of the place, but particularly the legacy of HIV and AIDS in the place. So it started to be renowned as Dorothy Towers in the late 70s, early 80s. And of course, that was the time that HIV and AIDS really impacted the queer community. And so it takes us on that journey about what it was like living there, the comfort of the place and safety of the place, but also the violence of the time, what the legacy of HIV and AIDS is on the place. And then it continues to this day, and we see drag performers in there, and we really get a beautiful social history of the place. And that will be accompanied by a publication by Owen Harrison, which is a nice moment because I did my Erasmus with Owen in Manchester in 2015. It was a very nice surprise. And that takes on a factual history of Dorothy Towers and based on first-hand testimonials. And that will be in 126 Gallery, and that will be captioned. And it's 31 minutes long. And we put it at 126 because it's a little bit further out, but it's worth the visit and it's worth to staying with. And it's the longest film, one of the longest films we have in the festival. And I'd really encourage you to go out there and see it. And then continuing on a queer theme, we will have 4 quilts from Philip Guffler, who is a German, Amsterdam-based artist. And we'll have 4 quilts in the main gallery by Philip. So Philip makes these beautiful quilts about kind of queer artists and scholars. Most of them are German, but most of them who history have forgotten. So it's a really kind of like an archive making, a memory making, and thinking about how we remember these people. The 4 I've selected, and a lot of the quilts actually deal with the medical history of these people, but also of Germany. As you may know, sexology and some of the first kind of like sexual identity clinics or gender clinics were in Germany. So Hirschfeld's clinic, performed some of the first gender-affirming care in the world. There is a quilt by Hirschfeld, but it was so expensive to get over that we were unable to get it. But we'll have 4 quilts so this one's Lorenza Bottner. Lorenza Bottner is a bit of an icon and a hero of mine. Lorenza Bottner is a Chilean-German artist whose arms were amputated at a young age and was moved to Germany to a rehabilitation center. And so she was raised there from the age of, I think, 14. And she became an artist. She went to Kassel School of Art, which is where Documenta is now. And obviously she was a trans woman, and she was disabled, and she faced a lot of ostracization, and obviously it was very difficult to have a career as an artist at the time in the 70s in Germany. But she had a very beautiful and successful career as a mouth painter. So she made these really kind of punky paintings using her mouth. She also innovated in ways of performance. She melded painting and set and performance in a way that had never been done before. She painted on the street. Really a really rich archive of work. Her archive is not owned, but is shown a lot by Paul Preciado, who is an academic who works a lot in queer theory. And so it's a real honor for her to be in the space. I wanted to acknowledge Lorenza a bit. She was also the mascot for the 1994 Paralympics in Barcelona. And she died of HIV and AIDS soon after. But this image here she was a bit of a high heel fetishist. So this is a little nod to that, and this is her in the background. So there will also be a quilt of Daniel Paul Frauder, I think. I'm gonna have to get the German names down. He was a German judge in the late 1800s who had experiences of schizophrenia and believed he was having visions of being a woman whilst he was in jail, but he didn't identify it in the same ways we would discuss gender today, but through kind of these these visions, these almost spiritual visions. There's also Lana Kaiser, who Philip wanted to show specifically. She was on German Pop Idol in the early 2000s, and she was quite visibly gender non-conforming, and she was one of the most visible queer people in Germany at the time. And Philip really wanted her there. There's, of course, Lorenza Bottner, and then there's Charlotte Wolff, who was a contemporary of Hirschfeld and one of the only women and Jewish sexologists working in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and was a lesbian woman herself. So it's a really, there's a lot of intersections between kind of queerness and disability, and I wanted that showcased through these works. I'm actually running out of time, but I'll quickly rush through these now. So there's a lot of work on the archive, and quilts. So we'll be showing Jamila Prowse, who's a London-based artist. Well, actually, no, she's moved to Ramsgate by the sea, but she's English. And this is Crip Quilt. So this is the first time this will ever be shown. We're very lucky. And it is an archive of her own experience as a disabled artist. Also the experience of artists from the National Archive of Disabled Artists, I think it's called. And she recorded those experiences. She also interviewed a number of disabled artists of colour and took those experiences and really, throughout doing this festival, it's been remarkable how little archive there is or material left of disabled artists. If you were in an institution, your work was rarely saved or archived. So to create an archive like this and really put down the experiences of disabled people in a quilt that will travel in kind of the legacy of the AIDS Memorial quilt is really powerful. So you have things like this, like one of the biggest barriers is unrealistic expectations of time. You have other work that says, when I got ill, it forced me to reimagine the ways I wish I could still make the art I wanted to make. It also has a little quilt that says, Iarlaith is the first person to visit me in my home studio because she moved home, and there's a cup of tea. So it's just an archive of the everyday lives of an artist, but it's quite extraordinary that these archives are not as visible or as public or exist or have survived. So that will be in the main gallery, and that will also be available online and have an audio description version available. Okay. And then this is Anna Roberts Gilvay's. It's like a fake archive, and I'm kind of obsessed with this work. So it's called Ridgewood Sick Centre. So she made it's like a fake audio documentary about this sick centre that was like founded, hundreds of years ago, and it's about what would a centre look like if it was run by sick people. So you have like theatre beds, or like you have how would you play music if you had tuberculosis, and all these wonderful imaginary things. And it's kind of like hearing the sounds you wish you've heard from your sickbed. And then to go alongside this audio piece that's available on our podcast platforms, she's made these like fake archive material from the sick centre, and this one is a score, and it's like hum one note as faintly as possible with whatever breath or energy you have. Bring your attention from what it sounds like to how it feels, vibrating your lips, your mouth, jaw, head. And we're very fortunate to have there'll be 4 of these images, and they'll be in the hospital, in a hallway there. So, and the audio piece will be available through a QR code in a fake corkboard. She's made a corkboard, like a community corkboard, with all these like brochures and clippings from this Imaginary Sick Centre. So we're hoping that this will be accessed by the patients there and people visiting, and is a really joyful work. Anna will also be performing on Flirt FM on, let me get the exact date, I think it's the 10th of November, and it'll be a very special performance. So she's a folk artist and a singer. She's been on like NPR's Little Desk, and you'll find that in the soundpiece. Okay, I'll rush through this quickly because I have 10 minutes. This is Bridget O'Gorman's work. So Bridget O'Gorman is making work called Support Work, and that's through a commission with Arts and Disability Ireland. It's one of our major commissions this year. And Bridget is an artist who worked primarily in sculpture, but through the changing condition of her disability was unable to continue making physical work, but wanted to. So Bridget, I'm her producer. I've worked with her for about 2 years, and over the 2 years we've developed a way of making a plan of how we could do that again. How could Bridget make sculpture again? And we came to the conclusion that we could get a support worker, so someone to work with Bridget to help her make work. So through the support of the Arts and Disability Ireland, Bridget was able to hire a support worker, and the support work reflects on this experience of how you make work collaboratively and collectively. So all artists know that you don't make work alone, you make it with friends and family and lovers, and it takes a community to make an artwork, and nothing comes from itself, from just one person. So it reflects on on the nature of all work and how collaborative it is. And it uses reworked assistive devices, so crutches, Zimmer frames, and walking sticks, with lots of jasmonite, ropes, pulleys, hoists, kind of the accoutrements of disability and assistive devices. And that will be in our main gallery. And that will be accompanied by a number of texts on our website reflecting on these experiences. And it's honestly been like a great honour to work with Bridget to figure this out and think about how you make work in an accessible way. Because it's not just when the work gets to us and how we make it accessible, but like the actual making process and production. There will also be monoprints by Paul Roy. This is my favourite one, hospital food. There's also one that says drugs but not the fun kind. And others say, I want to dance but I can't. So it's this really witty, humour, funny, kind of ironic prints on the experiences of grief and disability and access. And we have 10 of those works, and they are in the main gallery. And yeah, they're a really nice light moment. So we also think about like spaces. So there's obviously, when we think about disability and when we're thinking about festivals, they're really exhausting. And having moments to rest is really important. So Bog Cottage are an artist collective from Sligo. And they make spaces for queer people, but they really came together as a way of making work collectively in rural Ireland for queer people. So they're going to take over Outset Gallery, which we're really happy to be working with this year in near Charlie Burns. And they'll be taking over that whole space with a fairy fort, so fairy as in fairy fort, but also fairies as in queers. And that will have benches and soft furnishing and curtains. And will really be a moment to like rest, sit down, reflect, have a moment of pause. And that'll be across the road from the main gallery. But it also like reimagines rural space. So anyone from rural Ireland will know, fairy forts and their energy. And I'm certainly terrified of them. And my parents have told me terrible stories of, people who've messed with them. And then, but it's a really nice way of reimagining rural landscapes and who gets centred in those. And this is a nice little drawing they did called Feast. They're Orla and Bert are the two artists, and they are some of the most beautiful, gentle, and supportive people. And you can imagine, and they've brought in loads of friends. We both lived in Berlin for a period of time. And so a few friends from Berlin have embroidered the piece with some poetry. Artists have made a soundtrack to it. It's a really gentle soundtrack. It's a really collaborative work. We've also gotten a wonderful carpenter to make benches. So if you need a sit down, if you need to rest, if you need a moment to yourself, get into Outset. This is where you need to go. And we'll also be having a lot of education program stuff there because it's just so welcoming. So kind of now onto our events program, because that's also, so our first event, it will be Leila Hekmet's film, Symptom Recital, the music for Wild Angels. So Leila Hekmet is a Los Angeles-born, Berlin-based artist. And this will be the premiere of her new film, but also the first time her work will ever be shown in Ireland. In Palace on the 4th at 2:30. So make sure not to be too hungover and get to this after the opening. So Leila May had an exhibition in Haus am Waldsee in Berlin in November, and I wasn't going to go. I was very tired, and some of my friends were like, you got to go to the show. And I was like, okay. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's like an hour outside the city, and I was like, okay, I'll go. And she had made a fake hospital in the gallery, so it was called Hospital Hekmet. And the disease they were treating was being a woman, and they had all these characters, all these nurses, all these patients. They had all these beds, and it was very sexy, and it was very funny, and it was very camp. She employs kind of the humor of Jewish comedians. She's Jewish herself, in these very camp performances. She does lots of these performances in theatrical spaces. So whilst that show called Female Remedy was on, she made a performance and she recorded that, and this will be kind of the film. So then it's really funny. It's kind of half musical, half comedy. It's very surreal. This is Roman, who is just like multi-talented, sings, dances, plays, everything. And that will be 90 minutes long, and it will be in Pálás. And it's a real joy, this film. And very excited to share it. And that will also be captioned. Okay, so this is the next event in our program. So this is Anya O'Hara's birthday party. That will be on the 9th in O'Donoghue Centre in University of Galway. So Anya is from Mayo. As anyone might recognise, this is the St. Bridget's of Mayo in Castlebar. And Anya and her family have experiences of disability and growing up in rural Ireland as a disabled person, and the isolation that you may face. And so reflecting on this experience, and also how difficult it is for disabled people to find social spaces, particularly in winter with COVID and finding it COVID-safe events. Anya is making a social event in O'Donoghue Centre for that is accessible. So it'll be masked, it'll be socially distanced, there'll be HIPAA filters, but there'll also be music, food, dancing, games, and it's just a way. Anya is chronically ill, so and herself and a lot of her friends and community can't go to events that aren't masked, and it's very unsafe. So creating a social space, particularly in winter when you can't go outside, is really important. So I'm just really glad we have this space. We're also going to have a masked opening, so at 1 to 3 on the 3rd. So if you have anyone in your life who needs to go to masked events, that will have a masked event, and it'll be HIPAA filtered. So yeah, this is really important to have social spaces that are COVID safe. So I think we're almost at the end. I hope you're also with me. So this is Nat Ra's, let me get the proper title, Epistolary on Carceral Islands. So Nat, we co-commissioned this with Edinburgh Arts Festival, who I mentioned earlier. And Nat is an abolitionist, an artist, a writer, a poet, and an academic at Glasgow School of Art. And she has made a beautiful and critical performance that examines the connections between prison islands in Ireland, so Spike Island in Scotland, where she's based, and the Bengal, where so tracing the colonial legacy of prisons and how British rule divided and conquered, but also controlled landscapes to these prisons and the connections between them. So this is Base Rock. I think that this is the Scottish one. There's a prison on there. And we've also had really interesting conversations that it will take place in Nuns Island Theatre. And of course, Nuns Island was home to the Galway jail, and thinking about islands of prisons. So where the cathedral was, that was where the Galway jail was. And thinking about how these carceral geographies have controlled as people, particularly when we think about resistance to colonial rule, particularly in the Bengal and India, and how this particular prison that she will reference was home to a lot of political prisoners, and how political resistance came out of that. So that will be Nuns Island on the 12th. So we've quite a busy events program this year, which we're totally and completely ready for. And finally, this is the film I mentioned earlier, Abandoned Goods by Edward Lawrenson and Pi Borg. This was a film about the collection at, so the Adamson collection is a collection of artworks from the art teacher at Netherren, where J.J. Began was living. And he collected all these works under his name. We're not sure how ethical that was there permissions given? But the film Abandoned Goods uses archive material of Netheryn, interviews with some of the artists, and archive material of the collection, including JJ. So this is a book from Robert Louis Stevenson. I don't know who that is, but he used JJ's work. This is his drawing here, in his work, and that will. It's a really interesting film because it takes JJ's work is brought to an Art Brut exhibition in Paris. So if you're familiar, an Art Brut is the art historical term for disabled artists or artists who are institutionalized or lives in prisons. I think it's quite ableist. I think it's a quite violent term. Why should an artist in an institution be considered any different than an artist outside of it? And as they're unpacking the work, there's a French curator that sees Ballinasloe and can't pronounce it, obviously because it could be difficult, but also because they didn't recognize it as a term. So there's this like question of like forgetting. And it's interesting because if you're interested in Art Brut and artists working in institutions, it's difficult to not know that Ballinasloe was one of the largest institutions in the world at the time, and certainly in Ireland. So yeah, it's a really beautiful film. And then we'll also have a talk by Professor, I keep on saying doctor's professor, I have to get that right. Professor Claire Wills, who is a Cambridge academic who's written extensively and is probably the number one expert on JJ. And this is the first time that I'm aware of that JJ's work will be shown in some way and discussed in Ballinasloe, in the chapel gallery there, which is a beautiful space in the Ballinasloe Library. And then a moment for our publication. So because the themes of the festival may feel a bit heavy, they're not. I feel they're really tender. I wanted to create a moment to dig deeper and have a deeper dive into the themes of the legacy of disability and its treatment in the west of Ireland, of abolition, and have a moment for some deeper reflection. So I edited a companion publication full of poetry and essays and artworks that reflect on themes of disability justice, home, and abolition. And it also has essays on J.J. Began, so a Galway native, but also on Martin Naughton. So Joanna Marsden wrote a memoir with Martin Naughton. It's to be published next year, but we got an excerpt of it, the first chapter called Day One. And Martin was from Spittle. He was a monoglot Irish speaker. At the age of 9, him and his sister Barbara were moved to Baldoyle Hospital, which was a children's residential hospital in Dublin, because there was no services in Spittle for disabled children at the time. And he learnt English in Baldoyle. So it really looks at this experience of displacement, of incarceration, of how disability was treated at the time and how those legacies live on. Martin actually had quite a positive experience. He calls it positive, but it wasn't a nice place. And Martin went on. He became an engineer or a car mechanic afterwards. He worked in the hospital for a while, and then he went to the States, where he came into contact with the Centre for Independent Living. So these were one of the earliest disability rights activists coming from Berkeley outside San Francisco. And they advocated for independent living and the closure of institutions. He came back to Ireland and he was like, oh my God, so many people are living in institutions. And he was fundamental in opening this first centre for independent living in Ireland. So that was where disabled people could find assistance and get support workers and live independently. So we have a story of his first day going to getting the train with his sister to Dublin. It's in the process of working with Joanna, who really tenderly and thoroughly made this book, because he died in 2016 in the middle of writing it with him. Baldoyle, it revealed, is the precursor to the Children's Orthopaedic Hospital, which is located in Kappa in Dublin, which was the hospital where I went to Dublin to get my prosthetic legs until I was 12, and they opened one in Kilcolgan, which is wild. So there's this connection between myself and Martin about and the legacy of having to go up to Dublin, which I loved because I got a whole day off school. It took 5 hours before the motorway, and you'd have to stay the night, and it was lovely. But yeah, thinking about these connections, it was a bit of a tearful moment actually. So that the publication will also have an essay by Sammy Schultz, who wrote Black Disability Politics, which covers the abolitionist disability politics of the Black Panther Party. It will have essays on unionising patients. So a group of patients in Paddington Day Hospital in the UK unionised with the nurses and medical staff there for better treatment and better conditions. And there'll be some beautiful artworks and poetry as well. So that the launch will be on Friday. So if you want to pick up a copy, it's on there, hopefully. They're currently being hand stitched in Belfast, so hopefully they make it down in time. So yeah, that's the festival. I've just someone that I've spoken for an hour. Perfect timing. Didn't practice that at all.